Hi, Mackenzie. Okay, so looking at the two drawings that you have for the colored one, and in the black and white one, I do sense a little bit of lopsidedness happening right through here near the spoon. So I think just by pushing, um, I think it might just be the thickness. If you pull that thickness into, maybe something a little closer to what's happening here, that'll help that space right there. The other thing for the, actually, it might be for both of them, but when I look at the cup here, it feels like if I ran the ellipse, the bottom of the ellipse, it would actually come past this line. So that just means that the back is a little too close to the cup. So if you move this line up a little, maybe just right up near the top of this bottom part of the handle, I think that that'll really improve that sense of space, and make it feel more correct. And then the other thing is that instead of a white, and in fact, you might not even use this black line at all because you don't have black lines anywhere else in here. My attention is going a little bit too much over here. Now, two options. One is to take this line and make it more of a gray so the contrast lowers. And then the other option is to drag a rectangle back here for the very back layer and just do a really light gray. And just that should really push it. But I would actually encourage you to use other colors, even for what I presume to be a tabletop. And maybe it's not pure white. Maybe it's a cream color, just to warm up the whole thing entirely. The other possibility would be maybe the cup isn't pure white. And I realize that I'm saying things that might not be true in the photograph, but sometimes, well, actually most of the time, after certain progress through a drawing, it's more about paying attention to the drawing than the photograph. So when I just look at this without the reference photo, um, I like the colors in the plate, and then the kiwis are very inviting and warm, but the rest of it feels rather cold. So as a piece of art from this point on, I think a little bit of warmth, or like I said, little some creams instead of the whites, really might help. Lastly, the because you have so much detail over here, and then you have that evidence of a lip on the cup, I think that your handle does need some sort of indication of thickness, and that will make sure that all the parts are basically being paid the same amount of attention. Overall, your black and white drawing feels great, just has the same little issues that the colored one does, of course. So my suggestion would be to do your modifications on the colored one, and then duplicate it, and then of course do your other versions. Yeah, so that's so basically just some pretty minor changes. Let me know if you have any questions on that. Hi there, Connor. I'm looking at 4 of yours. Okay, so overall, they're looking really nice. The only small thing that I'm going to advise for the black and white version, excuse me, is that all the lines need to be of equal black. So we've got some gray lines here. It might just be that your opacity needs to get switched back to regular, normal 100%. And then for these areas that are black on the apple, that's a little bit tricky. I think you could just leave them as they are. Your other possibility would be to select them. I'm guessing they were made with the pen tool, possibly. So you could select them, expand them under object, and then they would just be, just like everything else, they become a shape, and all you'd have to do is fill them with white and stroke them with black. For your color versions, my favorite is actually your high key. I think what it is that there all of a sudden there's more of equality between your contrast levels. So this one, the black is very prominent on the cup, and then it's a little bit imbalanced because there's nothing dark over here really. But in this one, because there's some gray over here, and the value of the cup isn't tremendously different from the darker gray, it just has a nice sense of balance. One small thing for composition I might recommend would be, a lot of times when we're looking at compositions of such items, I would say look at the space on the sides and see if they could be more equal, especially in this case where the apple is a lot heavier and the cup together just have more weight. There's because of the combination of color plus the slightly darker values, they just weigh more than the cup does. So and you might need to give more space on this side, or you could crop this. Although cropping it, you might end up invading some of that shadow space, which you might not like. So it's probably the easiest thing to do would just be move your artboard out a little bit on this side so that there's more equity. The other possibility would be that you do both. You could tuck in on the right side and then push out a little bit on this side. It doesn't need a lot. It just needs a little bit. And then I think that the spacing you have on the top and bottom are fine. You could always crop a little bit, but I don't think that it would really change anything dramatically. And then your low key looks correct. You know, your yellow is just a naturally lighter value, so there's not much you can do about that. But overall, of course, the whole thing feels dark. So that's really, really, truly, I'd say it's more just that small compositional change. And then if you want to try to do the switching of the black stuff to shapes that are filled with white and stroked with black, that's also an option, but I don't feel like it's a necessary thing. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Hello, Olivia. All right, got your full selection here. Overall, things feel really nice. I don't see any areas that really need change. Your spoon is done very nicely. You've paid just a good amount of attention to the little bit of details without going overboard. The light key looks good. I think that the only part is that this particular area of the spoon is probably on the dark side. Now what you could do in this is if that white overlay worked for everything else, what you could do then is just go underneath that white layer and simply change that particular dark area to a lighter value. And then you don't have to try to wash out the rest for the sake of that dark area becoming a medium gray. For this one, you know, the only thing that I would say is in this particular one, the ice cream kind of goes too quiet. Like it's a little bit hard to figure out what it is. I don't have any trouble figuring out that this is some sort of cake or maybe tiramisu or something with raspberries. Those are done really nicely. But in this this part, I think because it's just fading into that area, is a little harder to decipher. So now what you could do on this side is maybe leave the ice cream a little darker and then, or compensate, you know, leave the white on top and then just make it overall darker so that the combination of itself plus the white makes it have a little more presence. Here, I think because the plate is lighter in the background, this just feels really diminished. So what I would suggest is this. A lot of times, I'd say the majority of the time, if I'm using a photograph as a reference for anything I do, there's a point at which I need the photograph, and then there's a point at which I don't need it anymore because there's enough substance in my drawing that can lead me in its own direction. So in this particular one, I would say I can tell like the light is coming somewhere from this direction or this direction, and this is in shadow, right? But there still might be a way to emphasize the ice cream just a little bit more. But like I said, it's working better in this version. It's just kind of disappearing in this one. All right. And it could also just be that the contrast is so high on the spoon that that's what's making it feel extra quiet. Your black and white version's great. You know, this part wasn't necessary to fill that in with a line, but it's totally fine. It's really nice and subtle on this one. The one thing that could help as I'm looking at it is perhaps look at the line on the plate. I'm assuming it's not just super flat, that there's some sort of edge. And I think it might make visual sense to include it. It could be as simple as one little lighter line, not even finishing all the way through, but just showing itself so that we understand the structure of the plate a little bit more. It might even be that it pops up over here just to give that indication of a lip. or not even the lip. It's just like that incline that a plate will often have. Okay, so this is great. No changes needed. And this one, it went very dark, so it's a very complete low key. So really, it's just very sensitive little things. It's not really anything to the drawing to change. It's just some color possibilities. So let me know if you have any questions on that, but very well done. Those tiny little hairs on the raspberry are really perfect because it's just that right amount of detail to let us know exactly what kind of fruit it is without going into over detail. Let me know if you have any questions, though, as you finish up. Hello, Lauren. Okay. So overall, the drawing looks really nicely done. I don't really have any suggestions for the drawing itself. I think you did a really good job there. My only couple little things to consider changing, and I think it just has to do with color. Because this cup is so bright and there's a really nice amount of contrast around it, this one where the contrast is lower, the potted area starts to disappear perhaps a little too much. So I would suggest that, my guess is that your photograph has a darker brown pot. My suggestion would be at this point, stop looking at the photo and look at your illustration and decide what does the illustration actually need to look its best. And my suggestion would just be to lighten this up. It could even be you switch it to a completely different hue. But if you leave it brown, it just needs to go a little bit lighter. And then also, since you have a lip on your cup, I think that this also will just need a small indication of one. So that's, I guess that does require a little bit of possible drawing, but not much. And then a small thing would be to, excuse me, I would lower where the table goes. And the reason is because it's running into this area. It creates some tension. So even if you just drop it to about here, that'll clear that up. But yeah, all those small changes in color and the flowers are really nicely done. And I like the relationship you set up between the flowers that are red and the apple. One last little thing, and that is just, I think you just need to slightly modify the artboard size. So that just means click on the artboard tool, which is, oops, you don't really need to see that, but sorry. It's this right here. And then just when you click on it, it automatically wants to select something. Like that's the one that my artboard's lit up on, so it's showing it. But that way you can just pull in on the sides or top or bottom to get the size that you really want. That's the only other suggestion I would have. And it's just because there's a little bit of a white edge. Now, alternatively, what you could do is just extend this beige box out a little bit, and then this kind of like dark mustard color down a little bit. And then that would be all that you'd need to do. Let me know if you have any questions as you get to the other variations. Hello, Elliot. Okay, looking at your 3 items here. All those make sense. Black and white version. The only thing you need to do here is basically when you select them all, change the stroke for everything at once. So basically that means select all, go to the stroke size, change it to something that you want. It could be either the larger size or it could be the smaller size. It just needs to be consistent. It's really the main point there. And then in the color version, I like the colors. I think they're working nicely. For the artboard itself, there's like a black line on the sides. I'm not sure what that is about, except maybe you drew a rectangle that has a black stroke on it. So you could just either turn off the stroke or just pull it back from the edges a little bit. And the other small thing would just be to decide, I'm not sure if you need this much space at the top. I would probably suggest cropping it off. I think your cropping on the sides and bottom are great. Just feels a little excessive on the top. So I'm just going to crop it here and see how you like it. So it's a minor thing. But again, sometimes it's a nice thing to do. The other possibility is when I see it all through here, I'm wondering is rather than having the academic planner be pretty centered in the middle, let me move over to Photoshop just so I can show you. Okay, so obviously this isn't how you're going to do it over in Illustrator, but at least it helps me crop some things a little bit. So basically, I would recommend something like this, where the academic planner goes on. It's just a little bit crooked. The only other change, though, would then be to increase the size of your artboard so that the brown color would still, you would basically, the composition would be the same size. So that means just expanding that background a little bit. But by having everything at an angle, I think it feels more consistent rather than having the one item more or less centered and straight and then the rest of the items crooked. So small, doesn't have to be dramatic. I mean, you could be more dramatic, but yeah, just something along those lines. See how you feel about that. All right, and then your black and white one. Yep, yeah, we already checked. The only thing on that one would be is if you decide to go ahead and crop this one, of course, then follow through and also crop that one. And same thing with the orientation. If you tilt everything, then just follow through on that. Let me know if you have any questions, especially as you go into doing the last two variations. Overall, though, nicely done.